I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. We are at GearFest 2012. It is Friday. We are here at Sweetwater with George Massenburg.
And it's great to be here.
Thanks for coming in.
Great to be here.
Good to see you, my friend.
Great to see the new studios. Great to feel the vibe of Sweetwater again.
It's quite an event, isn't it? Lots going on here.
It's great.
Thousands of people.
A lot of people. Everybody's into it. The feeling's good. People are talking and thinking. It's just great.
Right.
It's great stuff.
So, producer, engineer, inventor, educator. More. You do pretty much everything. And it all started when you were about 15 years old. You started working in studios, correct?
Well, I kind of started even before that. Dean Jensen, the guy made famous by his quality transformers, moved in down the street from me when I was 12. And he had a friend named Lee Furr, later of the guy that did all the Buck Owens recording. But Lee Furr was originally from Baltimore. And we were kind of this young recording gang, and he introduced me to these guys that ran a studio in Baltimore called Recordings Incorporated on Cold Spring Lane. Make a long story short, I heard my very first hi-fi experience off of an Ampex 300 playing a Westminster Sonotape stereo demonstration tape, and it gave me genetic changes that last to this day. It just transformed me into a listener.
Right.
And but that's where I came from. So that's even younger. Started recording when I was 15.
Right. And you've been chasing sound ever since.
I've been chasing sounds.
Right. So how did you develop how did your career develop from there? How did you go to becoming an engineer yourself?
Not very linearly, because I love music, and I knew I loved music. I was a trombone player, and then when that seat was full, I learned to play bassoon, not very well, and moved beyond that. But it wasn't very commercial, so I learned how to play bass in an R&B band and in a bluegrass band. And just loved being on both sides of it, loved music, and wasn't a very good student. So I was a better recording engineer than a student, so I was kind of drawn off to play that game. And I started building stuff right away. With Dean, we built an early line driver so we could do Baltimore Symphony Orchestra broadcasts from the old Lyric Theater in Baltimore. And sorting out how to evaluate, how to measure it, going out and buying surplus transformers. So it was always from opportunity to opportunity. There was always opportunity to be an engineer until around the middle of the last decade, when opportunities for engineers just to come in were transformed. Not to use the word too often.
Right. Well, things changed a bit. Yeah.
Things changed forever.
Some of those opportunities included you went to Paris for a while.
I lived in Paris between 73 and 74. I chased my first wife there, got married in Paris, made some pretty good recordings, but learned how to live and made great friends. Right.
That's
I
great.
recommend it. I recommend going to Europe.
There you go. Now, you went on to work with Linda Ronstadt, Lyle Lovett, Little Feat, Toto, Mary Chapin Carpenter. The list is really incredible. Something like 200 major albums that have come out under your oversight as either an engineer or a producer.
And some of them actually have survived. 10,000 Maniacs survives. Aaron Neville survives. And they're still good records.
Oh, they're all good records.
I find it pretty hard to listen to them because I hear all my mistakes.
Do you really?
Yeah, you can't.
Typically, your recordings are held up as having such excellent fidelity. And the mixing on them, there's such clarity and so much definition to what's going on there.
Well, that's very kind. That of course has been completely deprecated. The whole idea of clean recordings went downhill in the early 2000s, and it's just starting to come back. The new artist of the year, Bon Iver, has a great record out, and it's pretty clean. It has crunchy stuff in the right places and great production values, and it's just fantastic to hear great production values coming back. So I'm encouraged.
Right.
I'm encouraged.
How did you develop that impression or vision of those production values in your own work? Is that something that comes naturally to you?
It's all visual. It was described by George Martin as piecing together colors and shapes and timbres as colors, and it's all visual. I mean, I see it in my mind's eye, and it turns into something I hear in my mind's ear. And just see everything as well defined and very clear.
Right. So when someone solicits you to be a producer or an engineer on a project of theirs, what is it that piques your interest and makes you want to work with that artist?
Well, first and foremost, learning something new, having something new to try. And, even though it's all pretty much been done, moving it back to a very clear presentation, very clear and clean presentation with dramatic and this thing, to me, nothing matters if it doesn't feel fantastic, if it doesn't transport you to level 4. So I look for that opportunity of taking the newest technology, maybe it's a plate of spaghetti with wires coming all out of it, or
right.
smoking, and seeing, or new code, and seeing what kind of record that'll make. That's it. Like when we built the Blackbird room, my favorite thing to do in there was try different bands and see what kind of record could be made in that room. See if it was different enough, whether the influence on the room was enough to change, to again overuse the word transform, to transform the music.
Right.
It was, 1, it was, 2, nobody cared because it wasn't Nashville music. So, so that had its successes, but they were attenuated.
Right. So what you're referring to there is Blackbird Studios. You built a room there where the acoustics were based around diffusion rather than absorption.
Pure diffusion. It was an acoustic whiteout. And
right.
You couldn't hear the walls. The walls had no comb filtering. In a normal reflective wall, you get spectral interference. You get comb filters. You get up next to the wall, and that's why rooms sound like tubby rooms, and studios like this sound good, is you don't get reflections off the wall that have this weird character of comb filtering. So that room was all diffuse, and musicians could hear themselves so much better because they didn't have reflections interfering with the direct path. And unlike a dead room where the room doesn't really support a performance, this diffuse room supported the performance, gave two performing musicians a little bit of glue. And it was great. I don't think anybody really got it.
Really got it? Yeah. You were kind enough to give me a tour of that room and to play some music for me in there. And what was fascinating about it is it felt like when you were in the room like there were no boundaries. Like it was a much, much bigger room than it actually was. Because you didn't get any sense of reflections coming back to you. It was an interesting sensation.
And yet it had this ambience. It had an ambience like no place else on earth, because it had ambience at like 2K and 4K when normal ambience would be attenuated. It was kind of bright. It was very cool.
Right. Now, if I remember correctly, you were tracking in the same room as the musicians were.
Well, I like to do that anyway. I used to do that before I recorded in that room, and I've done that for years, where if you hear something, you catch a musician's eye and you wink at them or smile, or you don't like something, go, that immediate feedback of here's where I think we could go with this performance, and that doesn't work, and this works. Works a lot better if you're in the room with musicians and participating in the music, giving them feedback and helping to shape the music.
Right.
I like that.
It's an interesting thing because I think so many people who have project studios think that I'd get a much better result if I had a booth to put the vocalist in, or a guitar amp, or the drum kit, or whatever. But what you're saying is they might get a better result if they really focus on getting everyone in the room and focus on
the music first. When we saw Fab give this demonstration earlier where he recorded something and then he considered it, he just listened to it. Didn't make any move very quickly. Made little moves, moved the mic, changed processing one time. That's the way I work, is considering whether I'm in a booth or not, is critical listening. That's what I do. I listen. Anybody can turn on plugins. They shouldn't, but they can. But really listening and responding from the guts, from the heart, from the ear, and making a decision. I think you do better when your hands aren't sitting on the controls. That's later. That's mixing. That's something later. But when I'm tracking, I don't need to expound on the different kinds of things I can do to a kick drum with EQ. I have a good basic thing. I do exactly what you saw Fab do. I move mics until they sound right. And then maybe do some processing. You're less likely to screw around with it if you're just listening to the music.
So hit record and let the musicians play, and then go back afterward and listen.
I've recorded enough to kind of have a good head start on where to put the mics in the first place. So I'm okay taking a pass and then making corrections.
Right. Yeah. Right. Now, when you do that, I assume you're monitoring on headphones?
I monitor now I carry these with me almost everywhere, on these little Etymotic Research earbuds, ER2s, or ER4s, both. And it shuts out enough of the sound so I can hear what's going on. I'm not going to make a call on the low end. I mean, it's pretty good low end, but I'm not going to do anything to the low end that might be a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
But I can mix. And, a lot of the other musicians are on earphones, so it helps for me to be in their same world.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm there to mix for the phones. If I've got musicians on phones, I'm there to give them the best experience they could ever have on phones.
Right.
Now, at Blackbird, what's cool is you take the phones off, and it sounds exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the singer is off in a corner, but the band sounds exactly the same. It's
Right.
balanced in the room.
Right. And then later you come back with monitors in more of a tuned listening environment.
More you're listening on monitors and starting to piece it together. But it really starts from musical values. I do much more work with music than with tweaking early on. I don't tweak.
Which is interesting because you're also a technologist. Whether it's researching and driving standards for the AES or working on different things to improve the quality of music, but also when you're teaching at McGill University. And you and I have talked before about the importance of critical listening. How can somebody really develop that facility for really being able to tune their ears into what they need to hear?
Well, it's funny you should ask, because we've got several courses that are crafted for technical ear training. And any number of people do this. Jeff Corey does this that's not it. Jason Corey. Don't say Jeff Corey. Jason Corey does that now at Michigan. Technical ear training, where students are able to put a number on frequency bands, frequency bands and noise and certain tones, call notes, to learn how to think about spectra long before they've got their hand on an EQ. Mm-hmm. And that's a good start. So there's some technical programs that can help you train your ear. One thing is removing, if it's not your gig, if you're the artist, that's great. You're gonna go for whatever you want. And certain people that do that thing that Prince does, where he does everything, is the writer and the singer, the musician and the producer. Certain people do that well. Mm-hmm. Most do not.
Right.
Most should do one role, and the role of the engineer. And I think I know how to do that well. I know Al Schmidt knows how to do that well. All my pals in Meta know how to do that well, where you take out the emotional component. I don't have an emotional component right away. I'm listening to textures, timbres, and I'm trying to make the most of the music that's there. Mm-hmm. And it starts there with what does this sound like? Identifying an artifact, a ring on the guitar that's out of tune, or some little thing that's out of tune. Mm-hmm. And not making an emotional response on the music, not making a judgment call on the music, just dealing with textures and sounds. Mm-hmm.
So that's when you're approaching it as an engineer.
Yeah.
Now, what about when you're approaching it as a producer?
I'm listening to the music. Mm-hmm. I'm listening to the music, and if I hear an instrument that's not properly mic'd, say, I'll know to first look at, or an instrument that doesn't sound good, say, or that doesn't integrate with the rest of the performance. I'll look at the instrument. Is that the right instrument? Is that the right part? And I'll approach it more from an arrangement or writing point of view first.
Okay.
And then if it really isn't working and my engineer isn't changing a mic, I might have him or her do a little bit more work. Mm-hmm. But as a producer, I'm there for the music. As an engineer, I'm there for the geek. Mm-hmm.
How hard is it? I've spoken to some, for example, Ken Scott does producing and engineer, and he always engineers his own sessions, even when he's producing, because he finds the translation time is difficult.
Yep.
It sounds like you work with
I do that
engineer.
Too. I work as an engineer. Now, in tracking, I have very good assistants. Mm-hmm. So I've got assistants that keep track of levels. If I'm way over the top on something, they're going to help and keep an eye on things. Mm-hmm. Keep an eye on mistakes, because I make a lot of mistakes. Because I'm just churning ahead in the trough. But I've got very, very good second engineers that I'll bring in to help me get the technology straightened out. But no, I like to be there, and when I hear something, my hand is on the knob.
Okay.
That's why I like to work in front of a console. Mm-hmm. I like to go right to the muscle memory, right to the knob. That's too loud. Let's write it.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Into the phones.
Yeah.
That's what makes a performance.
Now, the other side of your career is the technology side of it. You invented The parametric EQ, 1972 or so?
I named it. The
You named
parametric
it?
EQ was basically a T filter. They've been in Western Electric handbook since 1936. It's a T filter. But I'm the one that said, these equal. I mean, we had an early version of Pultec called the Lang EQ, and we had an Altic graphic, and we had a couple of other EQs. They all sounded different. I'm thinking, none of them are doing exactly what I want to do. You know, the graphic hits certain frequencies and not others, and I hear this boink on the snare drum, and this is not really hitting that. What I really want to do is something that does exactly this job, this forensic job. And so we started trying things with a dual pot and a T filter, and then I had to invent the way to adjust Q. And to do all of this, we had to build our own op amp because integrated circuits back then didn't have the gain, the bandwidth, the low distortion to make a great EQ. So we had to build our own EQ before we built the great parametric EQ, a great amp, the great op amp before we built the great EQ.
Right.
So I mean, all that is based not so much in trying to be a technologist, but in trying to address a need. Hey, I need this knob and I don't have it. Damn, I better invent it.
Right.
So that's what's driven that.
So is that what drove you to build your own microphone preamps?
Yep.
As well, the sound that wasn't there?
Yeah, because most of the preamps we had heard were transformer in, and I built a board and used, I built a mixer first. I built a copy of an Ampex mixer with Bayer transformers first and EF86s, and they didn't sound very good. And then I used UTC transformers that I got from Surplus, and they were full of hum, and spent money on mu metal shields. They were still full of hum. I said, this is bullshit. And built a transformerless mic pre, and it did what I wanted to hear. But that's where that came from. Came from that need. I wanted to hear something cleaner.
Right.
I wanted to hear the performance. And the mic was a little in the way, and the wire was a little in the way, and the mic pre is in the way, and tape is in the way. So all of this stuff that I pretend to do well, I don't think I do it very well, but what I'm trying to do is to get all this out of the way between me and a performance. I want to hear a pure performance.
Right. So the preamp is definitely it's a transparent kind of an approach
it's
to
all transparent, and I own that.
Right.
That's where I live.
So GML as a company came about in the early '80s.
Actually, before that, because we started as a sound company for Earth, Wind, and Fire when I was doing all the Earth, Wind, and Fire stuff. In '77, we started to plan to build a big touring sound reinforcement system of our own. And by the tour in late '79, we had done it, and it was just this humongous bass reflex system. And the dream was get rid of horns. That was all in the days of Electrosound and these horrible, peaky, awful directional horns. And we went out and did a tour, and the sound was devastating. That and the show and the music, and it was a monster tour, and the sound had a lot to do with its success. But we built everything. We built crossovers. The original GML compressor came from that. We built EQs for that tour, and bought consoles. We didn't build a console. We later built consoles, but at any rate, it all came from GML came from those early ideas that we were doing at what was called the Complex, that studio that we had in West LA.
Right. You also built automation for consoles.
We built automation starting in 1980. I bought one of the first Motorola mini computer, a 68K based development systems for $25,000.
Wow.
I had to have, and something that you wouldn't spend $50 for today. But I got in early on automation.
Right.
Wrote all the stuff in assembler. You know, again, I didn't know what I was doing, but I had to do this thing, and this was the way to do it. So I had to get this working to have that.
So from those early roots, then now you have the preamp, you have the equalizer, and you have I call it a dynamics processor. I don't think you really refer to it as a compressor because it
really
does.
is a dynamics processor because it really does more dynamics, bringing stuff up and centering dynamics, and does just smashing stuff down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a mastering version of that.
Good mastering version of it, and more. What I learned was how quickly technology was moving. You know, most of the ideas in that went into these other automation systems. The whole idea of having a automation system that just chases where you are in the tape is a no-brainer right now. But back then with NECAM, it wasn't that way. I don't know whether you ever tried to run NECAM. It was a nightmare. So a lot of these ideas that we had were eclipsed by systems that were much cheaper very quickly. And it was very hard to continue in the automation business. But a lot of those ideas, particularly in Pro Tools, starting in Pro Tools 7, where I made a deal with these guys to do certain innovations in mixing that they did, and they pulled it off.
Right. And you did a EQ plugin for
And
for
we
Pro Tools
did
as
an
well.
EQ plugin and this compressor plugin that we still haven't gotten
You've
out
been telling me
there.
about that for a while.
It's really good. And
I bet.
eventually it'll be out. Now we've got over here in Studio A, they're showing what we call EQ5, which is the DSP version of the new EQ for floating point.
Wonderful.
And dual precision floating point. It's the quietest, most hi-fi equalizer ever
Wow.
in data domain.
Right.
It's really good.
Incredible. Lots of good stuff going on.
Lots of good stuff going on.
And we enjoyed your presentation as well. You were talking about how to move sound quality forward, basically, in the light of the MP3 revolution.
And for all of us to take responsibility for making better recordings. Let's get back to making recordings that give you that chill. Let's get back to making great recordings.
That's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely.
Right. George, thanks so much for coming in and spending time with us.
Mitch, it's such a
appreciate
pleasure to
it.
see you and to talk
Thanks
to you, and you ask great questions.
Well,
and
thank you
this
very
is
much. I
great.
appreciate that.
This is great. The Sweetwater Minute has been brought to you by
GML.
I guess we get to
GML. I get to do the ending, though.
Okay, you do it.
All right. I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.
I'm George Massenburg. We'll see you again.
Gotta get the last word.
Yes. You do it again.
No, that's it. I'm done.
No, you get the last word. Seriously, that was really rude.
Nope, that's it.
Jeez. Okay, this is great. You're great.